being here. I feel I haven't used one of these before.
Oh, it's good training.
Well, yes, indeed. Thank you for your help. How are we doing?
Perfect.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you, Mark, for that introduction. That was really lovely. And I would also like to thank all of you for being here. I feel strongly that our most valuable asset is that of our time and our attention. And I certainly appreciate you spending some of your time here and giving me some of your attention. I'm not sure that my 11-year-old will be up for that, but that's okay. I would also like to really thank Mark Boudin for having me here at Elk River Books, and I'd like to thank Andrea Peacock. Both Mark and Andrea come through our little burg of East Glacier and pop into our store. We have a general store that has been in operation since 1910, and it means a great deal to have Montana writers come in and say hello and bring their books and sign their books. There's an adage that Montana is just one really big small town with very long streets, and I think that that is true. And when they stop in, it just helps those of us that are working on writing and maybe publishing or not, it helps us feel like a larger part of that community, and it means a great deal. I'd also like to thank my family for being here. We had a pretty long drive yesterday, and I really appreciate all their support. So, like Mark said, the book is largely a whodunit. So given that, I don't want to give anything away. I'm going to talk a little bit about Glacier Park, and I think it probably has some parallels with Yellowstone Park. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about grizzly bears, and then read the first chapter, which I like to read whodunits, but I'm almost superstitious about knowing anything that might impact the experience of that. So I'm going to try very hard not to give anything away. So Glacier Park is, like Mark said, almost an additional character in the novel. And one thing that I have found in visiting with people about Glacier is that it really is an endearing place where people have almost like a proprietary kind of sense about it. There are a lot of folks in the state of Montana, I think throughout our country and also across the world, who consider Glacier their park, their special place. And I've given a little bit of thought as to why that is. I think the park is a place of extremes. So you have the terrain, especially on the east side, the way the plains kind of come up and then suddenly meet the mountains. You have the weather, which can change rapidly and is always a factor, whether it's midsummer and hot and dry, or winter and the winds are raging and it's sub-zero and you're not sure if you're gonna survive your 2-block walk to get a cup of coffee. So it's definitely a place of extremes. Daylight too. The summers, the days can feel just epic. Like, please, will the sun go down so we can all get a little rest? And then this time of year, you guys probably remember cameras that had stopped apertures that you could stop down. And that's how I think of the darkness this time of year. It's like we're inside that little pinprick and the light is being stopped down and it's getting less and less till it's a little bit of a darkness closing in. So you get these extremes, and I think because it is such an intense place, and when people go there, whether you are hiking or climbing, or even if you're in your vehicle and driving the windy roads and looking for wildlife, that intensity wears you down to where you don't have any pretense, and you really just are yourself. And I think that that's when very satisfying experiences can happen. When you are with the people that you're with, when you're all just yourselves, it's very fun, it's very intense, and those are very meaningful, just human experiences. And like I said, I suspect Yellowstone's much the same way. I know Yellowstone has devotees just like Glacier has devotees, and there are probably some people who manage to be devoted to both. Another wonderfully endearing aspect to Glacier would be our grizzly bears. Well, actually, all of our megafauna. You get your mountain goats, your mountain sheep, your wolverine, mountain lions, lynx, bobcats, and if you get to see them, you're pretty excited. So in the novel itself, it takes place the summer of the grizzly bear DNA study. And I was working trail crew that summer, and it was very interesting. I was also working at Blackfeet Community College as an English teacher. So my colleagues at the college were like thrilled to pieces because the DNA technology was new, and it was so exciting. The idea that you could collect hair, and from that hair, type individual bears, and from typing individual bears, extrapolate a population estimate. It was pretty cool. So my colleagues there were all excited. And then I was working trail crew, and they had a much different take on this study, in part because we would get spiked out for 10-day hitches at a time. And they're like, these DNA study folks are going to be pouring this lure that they used, which was rotting fish guts and cow blood. They're going to be pouring that around the wilderness where we're camped and impacting the bears' movements. So there was that issue. And then there was also the issue of, why do they want these numbers? Why are they trying to get a population number? Is the goal ultimately to delist bears so that bears can be hunted? And they were very skeptical about that. So a lot of my dreams had come true. I'd been able to get married, start a family. I was making a living in East Glacier, Montana, which I didn't know would ever happen, but it had, and I was giddy. But I really missed the park. So when I started thinking about what I might want to write about, I remembered that tension between those two groups. And they both, to my mind, had very legitimate takes on that study. I would like to go on record as I'm a big advocate of science, and I love wildlife biologists, especially those like Dan Carney, who worked on the Blackfeet Reservation for decades. And just, he would get calls 24 hours a day because there would be a grizzly bear among someone's cattle, and he had to go take care of that situation. And his dedication, and the dedication of wildlife biologists like Diane Boyd, who really helped recover wolves, it's amazing, and they've done us all a great service. That said, I do feel like we've created a bit of a bind for ourselves with the Endangered Species Act, because before we can protect a species, we have to count them and prove that they need protection. And in order to count them, we often collar them or manipulate their movements or in other ways impact them. And I don't know at what point an animal has been handled or collared or manipulated to the extent that it is no longer quite wild, but there must be a point in there somewhere. So if I had my druthers, we would protect grizzly bears and animals like them because of their inherent value. Because when you set out to go for a walk somewhere in grizzly bear habitat, you do so with a different level of attention and anticipation and usually excitement than you do otherwise. Andrea's husband, Doug, has spoken about this, and it's where I was able to understand, and he's really done a great job of articulating this point where we value bears because they help us be better as human beings. And that's a really wonderful thing in and of itself. So I would love if we could value grizzlies and other wonderful semi-endangered animals for that simple reason. With that said, I would like to read the first chapter of the novel, and it's chapter 1. It's called Missing. The morning she discovered Ezra missing, Clancy Dyer hadn't once thought about her brother Sean. She and Ezra were late. Clancy dashed through the aspen hollering, "The day is a woman who loves you." Ezra had taken to quoting some Montana poet. Clancy had no idea if Hugo was the guy's first or last name. But if ever there were a day deserving of that line, this was it. Sun careened off leaves laden with moisture. The sky stretched a cloudless blue. The mountains, ribboned with falling water, appeared scoured and fresh. She and Ezra planned to climb Bad Marriage after work to celebrate his imminent divorce. The clear air held a chill. Clancy drew her hands up into the sleeves of her fleece. A woodpecker beat a steady rattle. They had burned daylight, and Roberts, their boss, pissed about his lost resin wad and riddled with aches born of decades of working trails, was gunning for any reason to make their lives hell. She called in a sing-song, "Ezra, time to wake up. Robert's gotta burr up his knickers. We need to roll. Oh, Ezra, we get to scrape Triple Divide and climb Bad Marriage." Roberts had taken Nate and his 6 feet of brawn and hit the trail. They were headed toward Morning Star Lake. The aspen thinned. Clancy stepped out of the trees and into the sunlight. The smell stopped her cold. She buried her nose in the crook of her arm. The air stank of iron and rot, excrement and decay. Just beyond her feet spread a rectangle of crushed green where Ezra's tent must have been. A metal stake secured a length of webbing to the earth. Clancy's limbs twitched with the need to go, to get away. She made herself stand still and scan the tall grass, the brush. She spied it. Along a thicket of willow lay Ezra's tent, collapsed and shredded. "Ezra?" Nausea rose in her throat. "Ezra!" Waxwings sprang from a bush. A sharp bark made her jump. She swung toward the sound, expecting a coyote or fox, maybe a deer. But there was nothing but trees, brush, deadfall. She turned. Tatters of orange nylon lifted on the breeze, fluttered and sank. She ran back the way she had come, back through the aspen, across the meadow and up a rise toward the main trail. She needed to find her crew, get a hold of Roberts Park radio, call the comm center, and summon help. She needed rangers, people like her dad and Max Savage, who ran search and rescues, found the missing, saved them. She wished Roberts and Nate were still around, wished they had never left. The day before, they had all worked extra. Roberts made them clear a log jam from the outlet at Morning Star Lake. When they finally returned to camp, they could feel the storm building. The guys were out of pot. Usually, when this happened, Roberts sent one of them to East Glacier on a bogus errand like bar oil or chainsaw gas. But they were gypsied up the Cutbank Valley with no town close by in any direction. The time it would have taken Ezra or Nate to hike out and drive the miles of rutted dirt road to the highway and then to East Glacier meant they simply had to suffer, all of them. Robert started supper and cleaned his pipe. Unbeknownst to Clancy, he perched the resulting resin wad atop an upturned basin they used for rinsing dishes. The sky darkened, thunder rumbled in the distance. They wolfed down their stir-fry. The wind kicked up. It was Clancy's turn to dry. She wanted to be inside her tent when the storm hit. She mistook Robert's clump of resin for a rodent turd and flicked it into the cow parsnip. Roberts went ballistic. He let loose a barrage of cuss words and called Clancy, among other things, a trails hobbyist idiot. Ezra sent them to their tents, hollering that there was no reason for all of them to get wet. "I've got it," he insisted. Roberts was still pissed about the resin this morning. Scorn rolled off him like an odor. Tardiness rankled the man, and this was the first time any of them had risked his wrath by being late. "Don't dawdle," he told Clancy. "I expect you at that pass before noon, way before. You mess up, I'll know." He and Nate left with the chainsaw, shovels, and their Pulaskis. Clancy dawdled. She brewed herself a bogus mug of jasmine green tea, which she enjoyed while she read about the route of bad marriage in the Climber's Guide. From there, the route is obvious. She rolled her eyes at J. Gordon Edwards' ubiquitous line. Clancy had learned the hard way that whatever obvious elk or goat trail Edwards had found might well have been grown over or relocated at the whim of the wildlife by the time she schlepped toward a mountaintop. She sipped and studied her topo, glancing up at Bad Marriage, still covered in white. Snow and ice might turn them back before the summit, but it would be fun to try. She expected Ezra to saunter into their kitchen area, all bed-headed and half-open eyes, his reddish beard a tangle. No one could have slept through those crashes of thunder, the bursts of lightning and ripping winds bowing the sides of their tent. Clancy figured Ezra had fallen asleep when the storm passed, and eventually the sun was bound to roust him. It hadn't happened. She'd waited as long as she could. 20 minutes? A half hour? Longer than she should have. She knew that now. Clancy hit the main trail and ran faster. She ran toward her crew, toward help and contact with the rest of the world. She ran so she wouldn't feel alone. Ran because it was coming for her. She could feel it pressing closer. Not a predator or violence, but the darkness, the consuming hole of loss. Clancy ran because she couldn't save her brother. But maybe, if she ran hard enough, got help soon enough, she could find Ezra. For the rest of that summer, and for always, Clancy would wonder if instead of fleeing for her tent the night of the storm, she had stayed and helped Ezra stash their dishes amid the wind and rain, how her life might have gone differently. She would have convinced Ezra to hunker down for the evening, persuaded him to leave the hard conversation with his pert-nosed, high-maintenance wife for another day. In this fantasy, she convinces Ezra to play cribbage while the storm buffets her tent. He leaves, discovers his shelter destroyed, and returns. They sleep without a hint of romance or attraction, dry and safe. When she tells herself this story, it leads to another, one heavy with nostalgia for an impossible future. Thank you. Do you folks have any questions?
Are you working on another one? Because I want more.
Yes, I'm working on a sequel. I've heard a few people express some frustration with the ambiguity of the ending, and they're like, what actually happened to certain characters? So that has been wonderfully motivating. So yes, I feel like these characters have some more places to go.
Did a true incident spark your imagination to write this?
To my knowledge, no one ever used that lore for any nefarious purposes. But when I had small children, I started thinking about what if they had? Because someone could have. And if someone did use that lure of the fish guts and cow blood to get back at someone, why would they do that? And what would the result be? So that was sort of the little germ of the book. The seed, maybe is a better word. The germinated seed. Yes.
Obviously, writing, takes a long time. Throughout your process, did the story have any major alterations? Obviously, without spoiling. But.
Yes, the story went in some very interesting places, and part of that was it took me a long time to get it published. So I had to keep myself interested in working on it and sitting back down. And I think that was actually really good for the book because the plot became much more complicated. But I think more importantly, the characters became much more complicated. When I had first gotten the idea for this book, I was reading a lot of outdoor mysteries. And I found them wonderfully engrossing. But they often had a character that was just purely evil. Very simply, you knew, that the hero had to go take care of the evil character. And then I remembered something Deborah Erling had talked about, and she had said, "Don't bother to be a writer without heart." And I started thinking about that, and even the characters in the book that I maybe didn't sympathize with as much, they too had their stories and the reasons why they were behaving and acting the way that they were. And I wanted to empathize and sympathize with each one of those characters. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it.